Foreign Policy by Canadians. Bienvenue, la politique étrangère par les Canadiens. C'est un projet offert par 3 organisations dont nous allons les présenter ce matin dans cette conférence de presse. My name is Ben Rosewell. I'm the president of the Canadian International Council, one of 3 organizations co-hosting this unique attempt to bring the voices of everyday Canadians into the foreign policy debate and to help us reset how Canada approaches the world in the very different world of the 2020s. I'm joined today by Elizabeth Kingston, the president of the National Capital Branch of the CIC, who will be hosting, by Robert Greenhill, the executive chairman of Global Canada, a partner organization and co-host of the event a year ago that gave birth to this idea, the conference called Canadians Changing the World, hosted in October 2019 in Toronto. Joined also by Julia Anderson, the CEO of the Canadian Network for Maternal and Child Health, or CanWaCH, our third partner, and by Professor James Fishkin, Professor of Communications and Political Science at Stanford University and the director of the Center on Deliberative Democracy. Nous allons passer quelques minutes à vous présenter le projet dans ses divers aspects et par la suite, on aura une occasion de prendre vos questions. N'hésitez pas de les poser dans la boîte de chat ou d'attendre qu'on soit terminé avec nos présentations. At any time, please feel free to write your questions into the chat field or wait until we're done with our introductions. With that, it gives me great pleasure in introducing to you Elizabeth Kingston, who leads one of the most active and dynamic branches of this volunteer-led organization of the Canadian International Council. She joins us today from Ottawa. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Ben, thank you very much, and welcome to all, and thank you all for your interest in the work of the Canadian International Council. I would like to begin by thanking Ben Rosewell, our national president, for his vision, commitment, and unwavering support for the work of the CIC as a whole and for the work of the 17 branches across Canada. I would also like to thank the National Capital Branch board members, especially Hami Georgiani, our program director, Carolina Shimada, our communications lead, and Sam Amoa, our technical guru, who have worked tirelessly as volunteers to realize this session today. This is a most exciting time for the NCB and for the CIC as a whole, as we embark on a series of targeted conversations designed to foster a new approach towards dialogue across this great nation that will lead to a policy-making approach that is sustainable, inclusive, meaningful, and thoughtful. As president of the National Capital Branch, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to assist in launching this important initiative as we begin a full day of dialogue and debate to explore foreign policy by Canadians on the topic, putting public health at the heart of Canada's global engagement. Depuis le mois d'octobre 2019, ayant mis sur point, suite à une conférence majeure qui a rassemblé des experts dans le domaine des relations internationales et de la politique étrangère du Canada, le Conseil canadien international, ainsi que les 17 branches à travers le Canada, ont travaillé de façon collaborative afin de déterminer la meilleure façon pour la mise en œuvre de ce projet d'ambition globale. Par l'entremise de ces discussions, on a réalisé les 4 thèmes complexes et reliés. Et ce sont les suivants. Global public health, human security, economic development, and climate change. Founded in 1928, the CIC is uniquely placed to engage Canadians in these discussions, given its historic role as a respected and authoritative forum for discussion and debate on Canada's role in the world and on international relations more broadly. I would be remiss in not stating the extent to which the COVID situation has affected us all in a profound manner and realizes our common vulnerability as a nation. hence the increased importance that our session on global health brings today. None of us have been left unscathed by this pandemic that has killed more than all terrorist attacks and devastated our economic viability more than the Great Depression. But COVID has also brought to the CIC an opportunity of realizing a virtual platform. And throughout the day, we are delighted to have the convening power to bring together scholars, politicians, and renowned experts in all aspects of global health from around the world. I am also delighted to welcome the Honorable Karina Gould, Minister for International Development, and the Honorable Michael Chong, Member of Parliament for Wellington Halton Hills, and the official opposition critic for foreign affairs. Interest in our project does indeed transcend the political spectrum. We are delighted that Minister Gould will be presenting in the keynote address.
J'aimerais donc vous présenter Robert Greenhill, qui est le chef du Canada mondial, une organisation avec but d'encourager un engagement plus ambitieux du Canada dans le monde. Over to you, Robert.
Robert's muted.
Thank you, Ben. And I wanted to give a little bit of a background to where this foreign policy by Canadians idea came about. It was almost just about exactly a year ago, in October 2019, when the Canadian International Council in Global Canada co-hosted a gathering of Canadians in leadership positions across Canada and around the world who are interested about Canada's global position. And the sense was on the 100th anniversary since the Paris Treaty, where Canada for the first time really was represented under its own leadership at the international scale, that Canada needed to have a fundamental rethink of its role in the world, and that Canadian values and interests were at stake. And it wasn't clear that our present strategy was going to be effective in allowing us to achieve those. And participants agreed that it's not just waiting for Ottawa to come up with this, that global governance is too important to leave up to governments alone, that citizens have a critical role. And therefore, there was strong enthusiasm for launching a structured process to engage Canadians in a fundamental rethink of our role in the world. We started about 6 months ago with a look at a baseline assessment of key trends and sources of influence for Canada, and 10 strategic questions for policymakers. And at 9:30, we'll be diving into that in more detail with Besma Wamani, one of the co-authors of those papers, and with the Honorable Michael Chong. But this morning, we're going to focus on this critical next step, which is launching a deliberative democracy exercise. And this exercise by February will show the depth of commitment Canadians have to reshaping international outcomes rather than allowing our country to simply be shaped by them. And put another way, it'll help us understand how much political will exists for increased global engagement. The ultimate goal of the project is to channel the will of the citizens for global engagement into concrete policies that help change outcomes in international affairs. And in a sense, Canadian International Council, with whom we are co-hosting this, under its original name, the Canadian Institute for International Affairs, was set up almost 100 years ago just to do this, which is to ensure that Canadian voices and perspectives are reflected in the policies Canadian decision makers adopt when they're looking at our role in the world. So we couldn't be proud and pleased to be part of this exercise. Thank you.
Thank you all again, and I hope you will find today's sessions informative, thought-provoking, and inspiring. Thank you very much.
Very good. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce CanWaCH and its CEO, its newly minted CEO, Julia Anderson, without whose support this initiative of foreign policy by Canadians would never have seen the light of day. Over to you, Julia.
Thanks so much, Ben and Elizabeth and Robert. It was nice to hear your perspectives. We at CanWaCH are so excited about this initiative. Foreign policy by Canadians is really a new and innovative way to engage Canadians directly into the policy-making process. A major component of this initiative is to intentionally undertake dialogue and deliberation directly with Canadians. Over the next few months, we're going to be developing briefings with experts. These will be unbiased and evidence-based, and we'll be offering those to Canadians, to 400 Canadians. They will sit, debate amongst each other, sit virtually, have conversation, and at the other end, they will come out with recommendations on what should be the priorities for Canada's foreign policy. What makes this model so interesting and what we're so excited about is that we're using a representative sample of the Canadian population. That is to say that at the end, the results of this initiative will give us a clear indication of what public opinion would be if all Canadians were able to be involved in the process. So at the other end of this, we'll have collected the voices, thoughts, and opinions of Canadians, creating the groundwork for a foreign policy made by Canadians for Canada. CanWaCH is incredibly excited to be partnering with CIC and Global Canada to bring such a novel form of democratic participation and inclusivity to policymaking in Canada. Too often, we believe that policy can feel like it's created in the shadows, leaving the public feeling disconnected to the decisions that are made. Canadians are often told what our country will do and what the impact will be without necessarily having a sense of how that decision was made and how we came to it. So we like to say that instead of just going to the restaurant and eating the meal, over 400 Canadians will be in the kitchen with their hands right in the dough. Obviously, for us and for many others, the elephant in the room, as Elizabeth mentioned, is COVID-19. That's what's on everyone's mind right now. How do we get through this? How do we recover? And eventually we'll turn to how do we ensure that this never happens again. Therefore, global health is very much part of our foreign policy making. COVID-19 has demonstrated that health should be given greater consideration as Canada sets forth any foreign policy agenda in the coming decades and beyond. Pathogens have now been added, as Elizabeth said, to the list of greatest threats to our national security and to our economic security as well. And our research tells us that Canadians care about healthcare here at home and around the world. Just last week, we undertook a poll with Abacus data that told us that 75% of Canadians believe that when a vaccine becomes available, it's critical that every healthcare worker everywhere gets vaccinated. I mean, we've seen so many examples of the growth in healthcare workers losing their lives. In Ghana alone, there was a 156% increase in healthcare workers contracting COVID-19 in just 1 month. It's like being on an airplane. You have to put on your oxygen mask first before you can help others. And certainly our healthcare workers at the front line know this around the world and here at home. So Canada is at a critical moment. We need a bold, clear vision and a plan of action if we're to address the biggest issues of the day, COVID-19, but beyond that, climate change, poverty, just to name a few. We're excited to be bringing this model to Canada, and we're excited to be engaging with Canadians in the policy-making process. So the decisions that Canada makes as a country will be setting a new course for Canada and the world. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you, Julia. And last but certainly not least, I would like to introduce our partner in the expertise of deliberative democracy, the method by which we will be bringing the voices of everyday Canadians into the foreign policy debate. Professor James Fishkin developed this technique as far back as 1988 and now leads the Center on Deliberative Democracy at Stanford University, which has been formally selected as the university partner, as the expertise partner of CanWaCH, the CIC, in Global Canada in the delivery of this project. Jim, thank you for waking up so early in California. Over to you.
Yes, it was worth getting up for a 6 a.m. meeting. I'm so delighted to be with this group of partners in terms of, I'm honored to be involved with them and give greetings from sunny California. A deliberative poll attempts to represent what the public would think if it were engaged and informed and considered the issues and got its questions answered. What would the people think under good conditions? So obviously, the members of the Canadian International Council discuss in detail foreign policy issues, I assume frequently, but the rest of the population does not. What would they think? So this project will be actually not only a scientific sample deliberating in depth, but there will also be a control group who do not deliberate, who answer the same questionnaire pre and post. So we can really see the effect of engaging in depth. If you happen to see our American One Room project, which was covered extensively in the New York Times and CNN and various media, you would have seen that the deliberative poll we did last year in the United States with a national microcosm on foreign policy, but also for the environment and healthcare and the rest, and immigration policy, produced massive changes of opinion in terms of closing the division that we have here and between Republicans and Democrats. But we have actually done these projects, 110 of these projects now in 30 countries, and many of them have been conducted online through Zoom-like meetings, or also with special technology that we have that Stanford engineers have developed. And what we intend to do is to pilot the briefing materials, which will be vetted by your advisory committee and developed by this partnership, so that we'll pilot it with some meetings of the Canadian International Council members who will deliberate in the same way, but they of course are not a random sample. But then we will take the vetted materials to a national deliberative poll, which will show hopefully not only what the people would think, but why. So this has been on all kinds of issues. It has clarified the priorities of the public, the reasoning of the public. It's strangely enough, it's required by law in Mongolia before they can change the constitution, and they recently used it to change the constitution. In Japan, it was used after the Fukushima crisis for clarifying the energy choices, and the government at the time adopted the choices that they faced after that crisis. Also in Japan, it was used for to decide whether or not to privatize the pension system, which they decided not to. And I think we had a major role in that. In Texas, it's made Texas the leading state in wind power when it was last at the time. It was even used for energy choices in Nova Scotia some years ago. And in Bulgaria, there was a project about the condition of the Roma, who were then in segregated schools. And the deliberative poll surprised everybody by showing that the public, after they really understood the issue, would support desegregating the Roma-only schools. And that was embraced by the Prime Minister at the time, and that has eventually happened. And our Bulgarian partners give us some credit for that. So on contentious, difficult choices where people start out disagreeing, and this is made worse by our social media and the fact that people are in their silos and their filter bubbles. But when people actually talk to each other and open up and get their questions answered, they come to informed opinions. Now, personally, I may not agree with all the opinions that they come to, but I always see, as a social scientist, that they have good reasons for them. And the people who start out disagreeing see the good reasons. And those reasons sometimes can be used as an input for real policy making. And we hope that will be the case here. So I've talked my 5 minutes, but let me say I'm enthusiastic and delighted to be working with such a distinguished and competent group in such an important country. And we stand ready to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. As he mentioned, there was an exercise in Nova Scotia some time ago, but this exercise that we're running now, Foreign Policy by Canadians, will be the first time that the Center for Deliberative Democracy works with a national poll from coast to coast in Canada, which I think makes us the 31st country. They've done this in 30 other countries, so it was high time that it come to Canada, your immediate neighbor to the north. Thank you for the opening statements. I do have a first question, and we'll turn to Nick to pose that. Nick, if you can unmute yourself and just ask us directly.
Okay. Am I hearable?
Yes, please go ahead.
So I wonder about the papers that are going to be presented, because I think in the world of journalism, which is originally where I come from, that nobody now believes that there's any such thing as an unbiased report. And in Canada in particular, academia and to a large extent the press has, if not a liberal bias, then leans in a liberal direction. How will reports be prepared so that they don't start off with the kind of elite liberal view that is so common?
Thank you for that question. Jim, did I see your hand? Please go ahead if you unmute yourself.
So the format that we use is a series of proposals that have been agreed to by an advisory committee of stakeholders who represent the different points of view. A working group will develop them, but the proposals are presented as possible things that could be done, but with balanced arguments in favor and against. And so the advisory group, if it's balanced, has to agree that the arguments are evidence-based and accurate so far as we know. And the group doesn't have to agree about what should be done. It should agree that this is the best argument in favor of a proposal and the best argument against the proposal that can be clearly stated. And that's what starts off the discussion. And then the small groups deliberate in depth and bring their questions to panels of competing experts. And those panels have to be balanced also. And and hopefully, if there's anything contentious, the questions are asked by panelists from different points of view, so that both in the construction of the briefing materials and in the operation of the panel and in the construction of the advisory group, every attempt is made to have different points of view, and hopefully the result will be balanced and evidence-based, and it will be transparent. So you as a journalist or any journalist will be able to see the process.
Thank you. I might just add to that. This is the method that the Center for Deliberative Democracy proposes for the preparation of the deliberation exercise, and we are following and implementing that advice. In fact, the series of events that will follow today will feature the balance of experts that Jim mentions, but in the field of global public health, where we will be having a series of discussions on different aspects of that debate to identify which are the fundamental policy trade-offs, which are the questions that should be put to citizens. I would invite you in particular, if you're interested in how we're producing this, to our panel at 3 p.m. where we'll be talking to the drafter of the discussion guide about what fundamental questions should be included and how we make sure that there's a balance of perspectives. We'll be doing exactly the same exercise on the theme of the global economy, starting in an event on November 17th, hosted by our Vancouver branch and carrying on into December through a series of explorations of changes in the global economy. And then on issues of security on November 25th and November 26th with virtual events hosted by our Winnipeg branch. This is the open and transparent process by which we are taking the broader field of Canada's global engagement, boiling it down to critical topics, and within those critical topics, to identify which questions, which policy proposals should be put to citizens to ensure that there's as unbiased and objective a discussion as possible. We now have a question from Jerry. I would invite you to unmute yourself, Jerry.
Thanks, Ben. Our foreign policy, of course, is not going to be just a function of popular attitudes. It's also going to have to respond to events abroad. And in that connection, we're really coming to terms with China as a very different kind of foreign policy actor than what we've experienced in the recent past, partly reflecting its imperial history, but also partly reflecting a very new role that it's assuming as a major power with more than just regional influence. So I wonder to what extent the polls that Professor Fishkin described in other countries, have they been conducted with themselves in mind to do international comparisons of foreign policy attitudes? Has such in-depth analysis been done? And if it hasn't, should polls be constructed with such comparisons as being a major purpose?
Well,
Go ahead, Jim.
we've done 110 of these projects, but they've been on many different public policy topics. So they've only touched on foreign policy on occasion. And over the years, we don't have the data to actually compare. We have actually done deliberative democracy projects in China for local government, with local universities, and it's been a useful input there. And we did on a very hot topic in Chinese territory, Macau. We actually did with the government of Macau and the university there a project on whether they should have a press council that was government run or entirely run by the journalists. And the people in Macau moved to have it run entirely by the journalists, and the government accepted that. And we were delighted. That was probably the project that I was most nervous about that I've ever been involved in, because of my personal belief in what we in the United States call First Amendment values. So this has worked in lots of different countries, but there are global challenges in foreign policy that it would be good to see if the public can have a representative and informed voice. That doesn't mean that the government has to do what the people want, but they should be aware of what the public would think and the reasons behind it, and take that into account as one consideration.
Thank you very much. I have just put in the chat field, for those of you that can access that, our link to the next event, which will be on a different Zoom webinar. It was scheduled to begin at 9:30, so we should probably wrap up here so that you can join us there. That next panel will feature Robert Greenhill of Global Canada, as well as the conservative critic for foreign affairs, Michael Chong, recently appointed by the newly minted leader of the Conservative Party, Aaron O'Toole, as well as Besma Mamani, a professor of political science at the University of Waterloo. This is meant to provide a baseline of how to think about the challenges Canada faces in the international arena in 2020. And I would invite you all to join us for that first substantive discussion of our project on foreign policy for policy by Canadians. And with that, I would like to thank all of the participants at this opening press conference. Robert, who's already jumped off to lead the other call, Julie Anderson of CanWaCH, Elizabeth Kingston, our host for the day at the National Capital Branch of the CIC, and certainly Professor Jim Fishkin of Stanford University's Center on Deliberative Democracy. It's an exciting project. We're very happy to have all of you join us, and we look forward to you participating with us through the coming months as we bring this important discussion to Canadians from coast to coast. Merci à tout le monde, et on se voit sur l'autre ligne de Zoom. Au revoir.